Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never imagined a night like this could feel so empty. The house was alive. Laughter bouncing off the walls, glasses clinking, music pulsing in my chest. But somewhere in all that chaos I felt a chill. I should have been laughing too. I should have been caught up in the glittering chaos of the evening. The way Claire always loved parties. The way she could make every corner of a room shine. And for a moment I tried. I told myself I could smile, sip my champagne, even nod politely at distant acquaintances who waved in my direction. But then I saw him and everything froze. Henry had been quiet all night, the kind of quiet that made people forget he was even there. Usually he'd be joking with Jake or sharing a sly smile with friends, the life of the background. But tonight, he was a ghost in the golden lights, standing near the doorway, not speaking, not laughing, just gone. His eyes didn't find mine. They didn't find anyone. And in that exact moment, the glittering party, the sparkling lights, the music, they all turned into a blur around him. It was as if the world had stopped spinning, as if the glitter itself mocked the emptiness I suddenly felt. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he just isn't feeling well. Those thoughts seemed reasonable at first. He had been working late this week, his schedule demanding. His phone buzzing constantly with emails and messages I didn't understand. But there was a weight to his stillness tonight that felt heavier than tiredness. He wasn't just quiet. He was absent. And when I finally caught him slipping out through the back door without a word, without a glance, the laughter inside the house suddenly sounded cruel. My chest tightened. My hands shook and I couldn't breathe. I followed instinct more than thought into the empty garden. The cool night air hit my face, sharp against the warmth I had felt inside. I called his name once, twice, hoping he'd turn, hoping I'd hear a simple, "I'll be right back," or "Sorry, I just need a minute." But there was nothing. Only the distant echo of music, only the muted chatter that seemed to mock me, only my own heart racing, hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. And then the realization hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. He wasn't just leaving the party. He was leaving me in the middle of it, surrounded by people, but completely, devastatingly alone. I remember the first time I felt this kind of cold distance with Henry. It wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no fights that ended with slammed doors. Just little things. A missed glance, a half-hearted laugh, a touch that felt automatic instead of affectionate. I convinced myself it was normal, that long marriages evolved into comfort, into quiet routines. But tonight proved that those quiet routines could be illusions. Illusions that vanish in a single moment of truth. I thought about every subtle shift over the past few months. The way he'd leave the room when I approached, the way his phone seemed to matter more than my words, the way I'd catch fleeting expressions on his face that I couldn't decipher. And now, with him gone, I realized that weight I'd been ignoring had been growing steadily, quietly, like a storm I never saw coming. I wandered back inside, clutching my glass of champagne so tightly the bubbles spilled over, unnoticed. Friends asked if I was okay, if everything was all right, and I smiled, lied, nodded. Just tired, I said, but the words were hollow even to me. My eyes scanned the room again, hoping he'd appear, hoping it was some cruel trick of the imagination, hoping the universe hadn't conspired to make me face a truth I wasn't ready for. The truth that I couldn't admit even to myself. Henry had changed. Or maybe I'd been blind, pretending the signs didn't exist, pretending that the silence between us wasn't screaming. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite smiles and careful conversation. People came, people went, voices overlapping in a warm, indifferent hum, but I couldn't hear any of it. My mind kept returning to him, the way his shoulders slumped as he left, the way his hand didn't brush against mine, the way even the air seemed different after he was gone. There was a part of me that wanted to chase him, to demand answers, to confront him in that driveway where the shadows stretched long and cold. But another part of me knew, deep down, that the chase would change nothing. It would not bring back the laughter, the touch, the spark. It would only prove what I already knew, what my heart had been whispering for weeks, months even. He was slipping away, silently, and maybe there was nothing I could do to stop it. By the time the last guests had left, the music had died down, and the house was quiet except for the occasional clatter of a chair or the low hum of the refrigerator. I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the ache in my chest. I went to the living room, sank into the sofa, and let the silence envelop me. The party lights were still on, casting their sparkling glow across the walls, but now they felt empty, distant, meaningless. They couldn't fill the gap he'd left behind, couldn't reach into the space where his presence used to be. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat, letting the shock wash over me, letting the disbelief settle like dust. And as I sat there, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the party, the lights, or even the silent exit. It was the truth that I had to face afterward. The man I thought I knew, the one who promised loyalty, love, partnership, was no longer the man in that room. And maybe, just maybe, he never had been. The next morning the house felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, it was exactly the same, but because I could sense the absence of him in every corner. The coffee smelled like a promise that had gone stale. The chairs at the breakfast table looked too wide, too empty. I tried to convince myself it was just a rough patch, that he'd come back, that everything would make sense once he returned from whatever had pulled him away last night. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered something I had been trying to ignore for too long. It wasn't just a rough patch. This was a shift. A fracture that couldn't be mended with apologies or small gestures or half-hearted conversations. I spent the morning replaying the night in my mind. Every small movement, every glance, every silence. Why hadn't he said anything before leaving? Why had he chosen the quietest, most isolating way to walk out, leaving me to navigate a room full of people while my heart raced and my chest ached? The contrast of the sparkling lights and his absence made it all the more cruel. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the statement it made. I wasn't a priority, I wasn't noticed, I wasn't worth the confrontation or the explanation. By mid-afternoon, I found myself scrolling through our messages, looking for some hint, some clue that could explain this sudden detachment. I found nothing that mattered, nothing that made sense. A week ago he had been texting me casually about weekend plans. Yesterday, nothing. No warnings, no hints, no glances that carried the weight of his disengagement. Just the stark, sharp reality of his silent exit, echoing louder than any words could have. It was then I remembered a conversation we had months ago, something he said almost casually while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Sometimes things just change," he'd said, shrugging, not meeting my eyes. I hadn't thought much of it then. I had laughed, dismissed it as passing stress, as overthinking on my part. But now it felt prophetic. The simplicity of those words, once comforting in their ambiguity, now cut through me like a knife. He had been preparing me, in the quietest way possible, for the distance I hadn't noticed, for the truth I had refused to see. The realization was devastating, not because I had loved him less, but because I had loved him too much to see the cracks forming under the surface. I had invested years, patience, and hope into a marriage that was quietly unraveling. I had ignored the small signals, the subtle changes, because love, I thought, should be resilient. It should survive the monotony, the stress, the fatigue. But love, I realized, doesn't always survive silence. Sometimes silence isn't peaceful. It's the end disguised as calm. That evening, I didn't wait for him to come home. I didn't call or text or try to force a conversation. I sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in golds and purples, and let myself feel the depth of the emptiness. It was terrifying but strangely liberating. I understood, finally, that acceptance wasn't resignation. It was acknowledging reality without judgment, without anger, without hope for what couldn't be changed. And in that moment, I felt the first stirrings of clarity. Over the next few days, I began noticing things I hadn't before. The quiet absence of his laugh, the way his coffee cup always sat on the counter untouched, the empty side of the bed that suddenly felt enormous. It would have been easy to fall into despair, to obsess over his absence, to imagine every worst-case scenario. But instead I made a choice, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, to reclaim my own space, my own life without him. I cooked meals just for me, sat in the living room without glancing at the door, and allowed the silence to settle around me like a protective shield. Then came the moment that surprised me most. I felt a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years. Not power over him, not revenge, not anger, but control over myself. I could no longer control him, nor did I want to. The party, the sparkling lights, the social expectations, they all faded in comparison to the quiet understanding that I could survive, thrive even in his absence. I realized that his silent exit wasn't a rejection of me alone. It was a statement of his truth. And in owning my own truth, in acknowledging the reality I had been avoiding, I found freedom. Weeks later, I would hear from him, of course. Casual messages, half-hearted attempts to explain, to reconnect. But I had changed. The woman who once would have begged, who would have sought answers and justification, had learned to breathe in the silence and walk her own path. And the stark contrast between his hesitation and my certainty became almost delicious. I didn't need his explanations, didn't need his presence to validate my existence. I had my own light now, unblinking, undeniable, stronger than any glittering party glow. I often think back to that night, to the way the lights sparkled around us, to the warmth of the crowd that somehow felt distant, to the absence of the man I had thought I knew. And I no longer feel frozen in shock. Feel awake, alive, empowered, not because he left, but because I didn't allow his absence to define me. The party lights may have been fleeting, the music ephemeral, but the clarity I found in that silence, that stayed. That is mine. And finally, after all those years, I understood what it means to truly let go, and to stand unshakable, even when everything around me is sparkling, dazzling, and completely indifferent.